So hello, everyone. Welcome to the second episode of the Gretchen Casey Show. And this is where I talk to real people in the field of real estate who are not only experts, but they are generous and willing to share their knowledge and their wisdom with us here. And the goal of the show is for you to gain some information and some tips to help you reach your goals in owning real estate and to take some of the guesswork out of what to do and who to call to guide you in the process. So today I have Josiah Vandenbroek with me, and Josiah is an investor in real estate. He's a landlord, and he also does lend his money for private mortgages. I first met Josiah when he came to me to lend his money in private mortgages a couple of years ago, and he's also been a mortgage customer of mine for his rental purchases. So I'm going to turn it over to Josiah, and he's going to introduce himself and give us a little background about who he is, what he does, and when it comes to real estate investing and being a landlord and being a lender, he's going to share some tips and his input. So please introduce yourself, Josiah.
Thank you, Gretchen. So I'm Josiah Vandenbroek, and my wife and I are, real estate investors. A little bit about me. I work in the construction industry, and I think that kind of ties into the interest I had into real estate investing. In my personal life, I also enjoy skydiving as one of my hobbies, and I think that's really helped me understand better my risk perception and how to mitigate risk. And our passions in life is traveling. So one of the other reasons we got into real estate investing is, we wanted a way to fund some of our traveling. So that was our interest primarily in the mortgage lending side of things. The interest to become a landlord, I think after working in construction, you start to see the wealth being developed, and that's kind of what piqued my interest in that. So we started buying a couple rental properties, and we do manage those ourselves. And then, like I said, the travel portion, we wanted to try and find a way to try and fund that. And the real estate mortgage lending portion is really what kind of piqued our interest in that, and we're able to do that and fund a lot of our travels.
Okay, excellent background of where you came from, because I'm not sure I knew all that stuff. So that's really important, right, to know why you're doing what you're doing. So that's good insight. I think a conversation we had is probably what inspired me to do this show. We were talking about your conversations with people, and specifically, I think you had a friend who was dealing with challenges maybe around what was happening with the COVID pandemic. And what was your advice to them, and why, or to others who are maybe expressing their concerns or problems to you when it comes to the finances?
Yeah, so I work with a lot of people, and I tend to be a little bit more vocal when it comes to my when I'm talking about money or finances or investing. And it touches people differently when you're talking. Some people don't really care, some people do care. And I had a scenario where a gentleman did kind of pull me aside one day, and he said, I'd like to talk to you. I've gotten to a little bit of financial difficulties, and he was looking for some advice on what he could do to straighten out his finances, because as he said, you seem to figure this money thing out. And I kind of laughed a little bit, and I said, well, I don't know if I'd go that far. I figured some things out. I got lots to learn, but I figured a few things out, and I said, well, we can sit down, we'll have a coffee, and we can see how we can help you. And I think there's many products out there that try to help people financially, but I think they forget about the root cause and changing the behavior that got them into that position in the first place. So this gentleman had a lot of consumer debt, and I think the first step I worked with him was really developing, okay, how did you get into this environment that you got here? And we need to change those behaviors. Once we change those behaviors, we can start working on getting you out of debt, and then we can obviously get to the fun part of start building wealth and investing. And that's obviously where everyone, I think, wants to be, and that's where it can be a lot of fun.
Yeah, I think that is so true. The mindset and then changing behaviors is key. So that's excellent advice to go back to the root cause. People also have a lot of questions when it comes to being a landlord. They have fears, they have unknowns, and you've been able to do that successfully. So what would you say, any tips or advice about being a landlord?
So back to my hobby, I skydive, and I probably haven't done as much as I'd like to this year because of all the things going on. But one of the things they really teach you is, and one of our favorite sayings is, knowledge dispels fear. So once you understand something and you've asked the right questions, you've done your research, I think, and you have a better understanding, I think a lot of those fears are mitigated that way. And I think the proper due diligence through the whole process, like when we talk about becoming a landlord, you know, there's a lot of due diligence you have to do that pertain to being a landlord. So, you know, making sure you have that proper conversation with them, you're showing the property, then you're following up with a proper rental application. And then through your rental application, you're going to go do a credit check. You're going to cross-reference all your information across the board and make sure it all makes sense and everything lines up. There's no discrepancies in any of the information you've got. And then from there, it's important to sit down with the tenant when you do agree to rent the property out to them and go through the rental agreement line by line. And another thing that I've done, and it's worked out well, is I have a letter that basically they sign at the end of all of that, once we've signed all the lease agreements, saying that we have gone through everything line by line. That way there's no issues later on down the road saying, oh, we didn't cover that, we didn't see that, or we didn't know about that. It's like, well, we went through everything. So.
And do you have quite a extensive or well-written tenant agreement?
Yeah, so I mean, right now, if you're renting out in Ontario, who's where I'm located, we're pretty much restricted to the government of Ontario's mandated that we use a certain rental agreement. But what I would add to that is you can add things to that. So the process is not easy. Don't take a shortcut when you're doing it. So what I see is a lot of people that I know that bought a property, rented out, and they just rented out the first person they walk by. And I think that's a mistake. I think you need to take the time to talk to the potential tenants, do the proper background checks, have the proper conversations to make sure you don't end up in a situation, because I don't see too many successful people that I work with or know of that I don't want to say don't rent professionally, but they just kind of rent as a hobby. And a lot of them end up either missing out on a good opportunity or renting out to bad people, and they get in a little bit of trouble. And it's all because the due diligence up front wasn't done. I've had one tenant I rented out. She told me, she goes, this is one of the most complex processes I've ever had to go through to rent. And I said, but at the end of it, she goes, you know, I feel more comfortable knowing you. I feel more comfortable knowing that this is a very professional process. You know, obviously we're building a working relationship. It's not a friendship we're trying to build. I mean, if it turns into that down the road, that could be a possibility. But for the most part, this is a professional relationship, and you have to treat it as such. And I think a lot of people just don't treat it as a professional relationship. They start getting involved in, you know, their life and stories, and I think you can run into a lot of trouble if you don't follow a very strict process. And once you have a process, it's important to follow the same process for everyone. Don't just assume you have a good person and then, well, I'm not going to follow up on this, or I'm not going to look into that. Look into everything. The process, my process is a little bit lengthier, but I've had phenomenal success. I have amazing tenants, and every tenants I've rented to in the past are also phenomenal people. And, you know, that lends to part of the process and the screening process.
And what is you said you do background check. So what are the steps of the background check?
So the background check, so I deal with a company that'll do what they call as a credit decision report. And what I like about that is it's not per se a background check, it's more of a credit check, but then it also gives me additional information that is on the, what's the word I'm looking for? The application. So they'll tell me where the previous two locations are that they've lived. It tells me where they work. It tells me a whole bunch of information that I've asked them on the application, and then in turn, I can cross-reference that information. So when I get my credit decision report, I review that, I set it beside the application, and I basically just make sure that that information jives. And I've had situations where obviously, you know, the internet's not perfect and some things didn't jive, and then you have to dig into it a bit deeper and it makes sense. But I've also had scenarios where people are telling me, you know, I've lived at address A, and my credit decision report is telling me they lived at address B. And when you question them, they get really skittish, and that to me is a red flag. And anytime throughout my whole process, if there's any red flags, you know, that's something that I have to address. And generally it means that I'm not interested in renting to you, because you weren't honest to me up front. How can I trust that this is going to be a professional, you know, working relationship throughout the course of this tenancy agreement?
That makes sense. And do you actually call previous employers or previous landlords?
So I'm not a huge fan of calling previous landlords. I think it's one of those things where if you're a bad tenant, no landlord's going to tell me that. They're just going to tell you, oh, yes, they're wonderful. And if they are actually good, they're going to tell you they're wonderful either way. So to me, calling a previous landlord, I don't find it beneficial. Confirming their employment place of work, that's obviously important. I do follow up with that. But even I do ask on my application, I do ask for personal references, and those I do or don't follow up with based off the conversations I've had. Because once again, I mean, generally, if you're putting someone down as a reference, they're not going to say anything bad about you. But it also is important when you talk to people, you can get people talking, and people, especially if it's a personal reference, I've found sometimes people have, they're trying to give you a good persona of this person, and then they do slip up and they tell you a few little tidbits of information here and there that you really have to, you just grab those things and you go, okay, I got to follow up with that because that was an interesting point of view, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's good. That's really valuable information for people to take to heart and follow some of those steps.
And I can tell you firsthand that that's the biggest mistake I see is people don't do the due diligence up front. It's very easy to find a tenant to rent your house. It's very difficult to find a good quality tenant. And at the end of the day, my wife and I's strategy is to offer a high quality product to good people who really do just want a good, nice place to live, and that's what we provide them. And we joke with my wife, and I joke and say that we treat our tenants' properties and our tenants better than we treat our own house and ourselves, which is somewhat true. But they're essentially an income source for us, and we have to treat them with respect and do everything to keep them happy as well, right? Once we do secure a good tenant, so that's important as well.
Yeah, and you mentioned another thing, which is having a good quality property. You're not doing the lowest rent in the neighborhood kind of thing. You have good quality properties.
Yeah, you have to have a quality, well, you don't have to, but we choose to have quality products, and we don't, we make sure obviously we're cash flowing these properties, but we're not necessarily the highest rent. We're not the lowest rent by any means. But I think if you get a good fair value, I mean, in this market, it seems I'm seeing a lot more people trying to attain more and more and more, which is good. I understand that. But I feel like if you offer a fair price to a really good tenant, they tend to stay longer, and you have happier tenants long term, and then you don't have the turnover as well, because there's a lot of expenses and turnover as well that you don't think about. So that's important.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Good. Well, that's great information. So on to private lending. So I'd like to help educate people a little bit about that. Seems like not everybody knows about that, although there's more and more people interested in doing private lending with their own money and private mortgages. So maybe talk a little bit about your experience with that and your thoughts about private lending.
Yeah, so like I mentioned in the beginning, private lending was something that was referred to me by another real estate investor, and that's actually why I got in touch with you, Gretchen, which was awesome. And in the beginning, it was one of those things where you kind of think about it and you go, okay, well, there's got to be some, this just so it doesn't seem right. If it seems too good to be true, maybe it is, right? And it took me a few months of thinking about it. And when I started inquiring with you and looking into it and doing reading, I found the biggest issue I see with private lending and doing research is there's not much information out there for people looking to lend money. I mean, everyone will give you money, but it's very difficult to find information, especially on the internet, with regards to how it works. And that's why I think it's so beneficial to have a professional such as yourself on your team, where I can call you, you answer my questions. I mean, if you don't know the answer, you say, you know what, I got to ask and go talk to someone else. I'll get you the answer. But I think a lot of the private lending, what I'm seeing is all the knowledge that comes from that is basically passed on from one person to the other, because there's really not a lot of information available on how it works, the legal side of things, and what's involved with it. So that's where someone like yourself really comes in handy. And a lot of people who might be skeptics or they have questions, I mean, reaching out to you would be a phenomenal resource, right?
Yes, yeah, I think so. I do have experience with it as well, and I appreciate that comment. And also, I guess a concern I hear is, what if there's default, or do people default, and how is that handled? And what would you have to say about that experience or in question?
Yeah, so I mean, like I said, skydiving, has taught me a lot about risk perception, and I'll tell you one thing right now: high returns come with high risk, right? And that's something that you have to weigh. Is real estate investing for everybody? I would say no, probably not. I mean, if you do loan out money, let's say you loan out some money on a private mortgage and you can't sleep at night because you've loaned money out because you're concerned of a default, then maybe this avenue isn't for you. But I think the nice thing I really like about private lending is you get a lot of information on the person requesting money. So you've got all their personal information. Obviously, you do your due diligence, review that, and then you set together a loan agreement. I personally believe that the risk is obviously there and very real, but I think at the same token, the risk is there. But in a sense, when you look at and understand how you're secured on title, the risk is greatly mitigated. And in general, when you look at default rates, they've been pretty low across Canada. We've done really well with our financial system, and I think that default rate as a whole is very low. And obviously, it's still a concern, but I don't think it's something that should keep you up at night by any stretch of the imagination.
And I don't think you've ever had any major or any default other than maybe payments being a little late a couple times in my knowledge, but I don't know all of your lending experience. Is that accurate, or have you had anything?
Yeah, so I've never personally had anyone default. I think I've done, just let me think here off the top of my head, maybe 13 different private mortgages. And I haven't had any issues. Like I said, there's been the odd late payment. There's always a quick little story that kind of makes sense. I mean, everyone's human, and both times that it happened were honest errors, right? And you understand that, and you have a clause in your mortgage agreement that there is a fee for a missed payment or a late payment. And I've had both times. I've had both clients honor that, and there was never an issue with that. So
yeah, so that's good to know. Okay, and what would be your last piece of advice to Canadians right now?
Well, things are a little funny right now. There's a lot of fear out there. I don't know if you turn on the news and you watch what's going on, but my advice would be, take everything with a grain of salt. There's a lot of hope for Canada. There's a lot of hope for Canadians, and there's so much good happening right now. And the biggest thing I want to leave people with is, just because there's a pandemic going on or something changes, focus on your goals, keep investing. There's no need to stop investing because of something that's going on right now. I was actually talking to another broker, and they told me that 60% of their lenders are on hold because of this pandemic right now. And that was mind-boggling to me. I thought now's the time where you double down and you keep going, right?
Yeah. Well, I agree. I mean, I understand some people are a little more cautious, but I think those who are willing to proceed with their pre-COVID plans during this time are going to benefit from that, and kind of just keep their mental health healthy and their goals on track.
Yeah. So, and like I said, you have to you have to create a plan, and then you have to execute that plan to achieve your goals. And obviously you can't predict what's going to happen in the future, but you can also look at what's going on, stick to your plan, and just keep investing. The strategy doesn't change. You're looking for, income producing properties. You're looking for good mortgage opportunities, and those exist whether, the stock market's down, whether there's a COVID pandemic. There's always deals to be had. And that's where, like I said, it's important to deal with professionals such as yourself to seek out those deals, and work with a good real estate agent to find maybe a good real estate deal where you can possibly become a landlord and have a tenant as well. So like I say, there's a lot of fear going on right now, and I do not believe that this is the end of the world. I think the world's got a lot of good left in it, and we've got a lot of years left in it. So we just need to keep investing and keep our heads on our shoulders and not go crazy.
Excellent advice. Josiah, thank you so much for being here today. And I'm sure you're helping a lot of people who are going to watch this. So I really appreciate that.
Awesome, Gretchen. It was great talking to you.
Okay, take care.
Yeah, you too.